And you can go on the church history website and see that he was the first black man to receive the office of high priest, which is pretty awesome that we're acknowledging that and seeing that now. Hi everybody, I'm Taylor Ricks. Thanks for coming to week 2 of Mix It Up, Black History and the Restoration. So what we do here is we mix up a recipe like two friends hanging out in the kitchen while we talk about somebody from church history who was African American and who paved the way for the rest of us. So I'm just so excited that you're here to join me again this week. This week we're going to be making barbecue bacon chicken, stuffed barbecue bacon chicken, super yummy. And while we mix that up, we're going to learn about Joseph T. Ball Jr. So before we get started, I'll just quickly show you what I'm doing and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. So I've got some chicken tenders pounded out flat. I usually use chicken breast, but I grabbed tenders at Costco, so tenders it is. So some chicken tenders that I kind of pounded flat. I like to do it in like a Ziploc bag and then I don't have flying chicken all over my house, yucky. This is cream cheese with like garlic powder, onion powder, salt and pepper, and some cheddar cheese mixed in, room temperature. And I do those just have to taste, like some people like more or less. Then I have some raw bacon right here, yum. And then just a pan, but make sure it's a deep pan. I've done it on a cookie sheet before and it's a great regret of my life because these do release like a lot of juices when they're cooking. And yeah, you definitely want a pan that catches it. I learned that the hard way. Okay, so while I roll those up, we're going to talk about Joseph T. Ball Jr. Not the game T-ball. I didn't realize it sounded like that until we got started. So Joseph T. Ball was born February 21st, but the funny part is we're not sure what year. Either 1804, 1805, or 1806, which means he was about the age of Joseph Smith, who was born in 1805. So somewhere around there. And he was born in Boston, Massachusetts, to his parents, you'll never guess, Joseph T. Ball Sr., and his mom was Mary Montgomery. So his dad, Joseph, he moved to Boston from Jamaica. And he moved there by 1796. We don't know exactly what year he got there, we just know that like for sure he was there by 1796 because that is when he started the African Society of Boston to support other African Americans in the area. We'll remember around that time Boston was a free slave state, but obviously there was still much to learn and do, just as there is now. And so he started that society for the people there. Mary Montgomery, we don't have her race written down anywhere, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But she grew up in Boston, and from everything that we gather, and you'll see, they're pretty sure that she was actually Caucasian. So they had their first kid together in the 1800s, and they went on to have 6 kids together, including Joseph Jr. And they never got married in that time. So that would be another indication that she probably was not the same race as Joseph because back then in Boston, it was against the law to marry outside of your race. So they had all of those children and were not quite married yet. They didn't get married until 1816. So their first child was born in 1800 and they weren't married until 1816. And they had a few sons and a few daughters. I couldn't find the exact count. But the family, it was kind of interesting because in the census in 1810 and 1820, the whole family is recorded as just not white. So they weren't listed as black like most people were at that time in the census if they were black, but they were listed as not white. And then after 1830, every census after that, they were listed as white. And that is, like I said, they got married in 1816. So it is believed that they took that time for Joseph Sr. to kind of separate himself from the African American crowd and he started kind of presenting himself as white, which sounds super confusing because you don't really get to choose what you look like. But we don't really know, he's from Jamaica, but we don't know his skin tone shades. I couldn't find pictures of him or what his parents' races were. And so it's possible that he looked, I'm gonna guess, this is just a guess, that he looked kind of like me, so that he was maybe a little bit mixed. And the reason I say that is because their daughters, Mary and Martha, Lucy and Martha, I guess I'm making stuff up. Lucy and Martha, they started a school together, and people would call them like slightly colored. And then a newspaper article that came out about their school said it was ran by two lovely white women who were well acquainted for the job. So if Joseph Sr., you guys, my brain, if Joseph Sr. looked like me and Mary, his wife, was white, then their kids might kind of look like what my kids look like. So I first had Tatum, and he was like so cute, and he came out with like this beautiful like caramel skin, and it was so darling, because I married a white person as well. And I just thought, okay, that's what all my kids are gonna look like. They're gonna have like this beautiful caramely skin that's kind of like my skin, kind of like my husband's skin tone, and that's just kind of what I planned on. Well, then my second child was born, little Emerson, and bless her, she looks just like her daddy. She has the same light skin tone as him. And I honestly, they handed her to me, and I was like, I was in the room when she was born, obviously. No other baby was in here, but I'm not sure she looks like me, what I would expect. But she has a lot of features like me. She looks a lot like me, but she has all the skin tone and hair tone and eye color of her dad. So that's fun. But her and Tate look so, so different. And then we adopted little Zany, and he's just like our little sweet chocolate boy, and we love him. And then we had Drake, and Drake was even lighter than Emerson. I was so, so surprised by that. So that being said, I feel like it's very, very possible that if Joseph Sr. was a little lighter, that he, and then he married a white woman. Again, it's not written down, but that's what we're assuming based on where she lived and her name and all those things. It would be very possible that their kids could easily look very light-skinned. Even with that being said, Martha, not Mary, Martha and Lucy, they became like activists, and they tried to lead the cause for African Americans in America, which I think is incredible and honorable, because it would have been so easy in the 1800s, oh, so easy to just be like, I'm white, I look white, I am white, and then wash their hands of the movement, because it's not like it was a movement that people were excited about. It's not like you got people happy when you were having that kind of movement. And so I just think that is so admirable that they took that charge to lead the movement, even though they in some ways had an out, because so many people saw them as white. So the same is true of Joseph Ball Jr. The people in the church and everybody saw him as white. The way we know this is that in church records at the time, if somebody was colored, they would write not nice stuff by their names to denote that they were a different race, but nowhere in any of the church documents where his name is recorded, like then, is there a race written next to his name. So I was gonna guess that he looked a lot like his sisters. In fact, there are some writings that say that he was slightly colored, just like his sisters were slightly colored. So that's kind of the background there, and I felt like I had a little kinship to this family because I get to have a cute family that has all kinds of colors in it, and we absolutely love it. My kids think it's so fun, and so I could relate to this family. So that's a big background on this family. But Joseph, we don't know how he got introduced to the church. There's some guesses on what missionaries taught him, but we just don't know. But we do know that by 1833, September-ish, he had moved to Ohio because we have records of him in Ohio. And he was presented in front of a group, like a congregation, in 1836 in Ohio to be ordained to the office of an elder. And it was too many people voted against it. What's it called? They didn't sustain it. They objected. And so he was not ordained right at that time. But we know he was ordained within the next few months because he was called on a mission to serve with President Wilford Woodruff. Well, he wasn't the president yet, but that's who he went out with, was the future prophet, Wilford Woodruff. And they were called to serve. They went to the Fox Islands in Maine, and they were only there a couple months when Joseph's mom called, and, well, called, that would be cool. She wrote a letter, an urgent letter for Joseph to come home. And we don't know what was in the letter or why she was asking for him to come home, but we do know that his dad passed away a few months prior, and so it's probably in relation to that. So within a month of her writing the letter, he was already headed home, and he spent some time at home back in Boston with his mom before he went back out on his mission with Wilford Woodruff, and they went up and down like the New England area is where they served and worked and taught people. By the end of his mission, they were saying that he had baptized over 50 people. So that is pretty incredible, a pretty incredible testimony of the missionary that he was and the dedication he had to teaching the gospel. So he, around 1841, he moved to Nauvoo, and he was expecting to be able to go there and to take out his endowment, or receive his endowment, excuse me. And however, when he got there, the temple wasn't quite ready yet, and so he couldn't receive his endowment. But he did, it is recorded that he did do some of the first baptisms for the dead in the Mississippi River, and they were for his dad, one of his sisters, and I didn't get the name of the sister, which is sad. One of his sisters and one of his friends, and he was able to do proxy baptisms for them in the Mississippi River in Nauvoo before the temple was complete. I don't know if you have seen, but Brother Anthony Sweat, he wrote a book for the DNC and illustrated it, and it's beautiful and amazing. You can get it at Deseret Book. But he kind of tells like untold stories of the Doctrine and Covenants to kind of go along with this Doctrine and Covenants year, so check it out if you haven't already. But he tells stories of people doing the earliest baptisms for the dead in the river as well in that book. And then he talks about how later the prophet was like, turns out we need to do those in the temple. So that's kind of cool, and you can check it out. He has done these gorgeous illustrations to go with it, to go with all the stories that he found that are like unknown or lesser known stories, and it's awesome. So definitely look that up. So he kind of, I think, ratifies that story of him doing baptisms for the dead in the river. So while he was doing that, some of the leadership in Boston went a little bit crazy so he's in Nauvoo, and back home in Boston, like, the leadership went a little sideways. Now you have to remember, they couldn't broadcast a general conference. They couldn't send like a mass email and get news out right away. Who was like so thankful for that, by the way, during 2020, is that we could get information from our leaders like instantly, the whole church at the same time. And I think sometimes I take that for granted. So clearly they couldn't do that. And so because of that, and you'll see this as we're studying the DNC this year, because of that, some of the thoughts and ideas got kind of twisted, like they ran with things instead of finding out how they were really supposed to do it. So that kind of started happening in Boston. And so Joseph like went back to like figure it all out. Some of the leadership there was excommunicated because of the direction they decided to go with how they lived certain things. And Joseph was asked to be the branch president, and he was the branch president like 8 months or something. But this is on church records on the website right now today, it makes him the first African American to have been a high priest and to have led or presided over a congregation. So that's a huge deal. But what's important to remember is that the church did not see him as black then, but they see him as black now. So then he was just seen as another white man leading a congregation, but now we can look at it and see that he was the first African American to lead a congregation, to preside as a branch president. So that's an interesting distinction to make. The reason we know the church didn't consider him that is they would go to like conferences, and the people that I talked about last week, if you remember, and Brother Abel that we're going to talk about next week, were at the conference, and they would note them as black at the conference on the roll or whatever, but they never noted Joseph as black. And in all those months and years that he spent teaching with Wilford Woodruff, he, in his journal, would write the people he was with. He wrote a lot about Joseph in his journal. He never wrote that Joseph was black, but he did write if other people were black. So it's all in how you look at it, but a lot of historians and stuff say that like the church didn't see him as black then, but they recognize that he is black now, and you can go on the church history website and see that he was the first black man to receive the office of high priest, which is pretty awesome that we're acknowledging that and seeing that now. So then after serving as the high priest, he was asked to go back to Nauvoo, and he kind of drug his feet a little bit. It took him a little while to get there because he arrived to Ohio, like he was asked at the beginning of 1845, and he got to Ohio in June. So apparently that was a long time. And so he got there in June, and he taught a 2-day conference there. It sounded like a state conference. And at the state conference, he taught the necessity of gathering in Zion and the necessity of being obedient and obeying counsel. So he taught that there, moved along, and he finally got to Nauvoo in July. When he arrived there, he received his patriarchal blessing by William Smith. And William, in his blessing, set him apart as a holder of the Melchizedek priesthood, and his lineage was in the house of Joseph, which another important thing to note is others that received patriarchal blessings at the time who were black or African American received the lineage of Cain, Canaan, or Ham. So they were definitely separated. Like, that's not something that happens anymore in the church because we're all adopted into the gospel of Christ. But that happened then. So historians will say that that's another indication that the general population of the church did not see Joseph as black. But we know through lineage he is, and that's important because nobody's going to believe that my kids are like a quarter black either. Oh, bless their hearts. So no one's gonna believe my kids, so we gotta believe Joseph. By late summer, Parley P. Pratt and Orson Hyde were starting to get worried about Joseph's faithfulness. They wrote letters to Nauvoo and told people we're a little worried that he is not living the gospel and might need to be excommunicated, but I don't know why. I don't know what he was doing. They didn't say. But we do know that eventually, by the end of that year, probably before their letters got to Nauvoo, Joseph and William, the patriarch that gave him that blessing, they left Nauvoo. And then there was a man by the name of James Strang who started a breakoff version of the church around that time. And we don't have records in that church or in our church to say that Joseph joined that church, Joseph Ball joined that church, but we do have a letter that Joseph Ball wrote from Boston to James Strang, asking him to come and speak to a congregation there. We feel like that's a decent indication that he may have joined his church or looked into it. And we also feel like we don't see a lot going on with him in the church, our church, after that. So it's a good chance that whatever was happening, some drama, he led him to do that, to leave and to move on. We don't really know. So that'd be interesting to find out. And I believe William did leave, from what I understand, that patriarch did. And that's another reason we're kind of yeah, Joseph left Nauvoo with him. He wrote this letter, probably happened. So then Joseph T. Ball Jr. died in Boston, September 20th, 1861, after a 3-year struggle with tuberculosis. And on his death certificate, there is no race listed, which just further substantiated the claim that people were not sure. And so it will be interesting to meet him and find out. So now that these are rolled up, that is the story of Joseph T. Ball Jr., by the way. Thanks for coming. Now that these are rolled up, I'm gonna throw them in the oven. Because of like how thick your chicken might be or how big or whatever, you kind of have to watch them. I would say throw them in 350 for like a half an hour, get them like halfway cooked, and then I pour whatever your favorite barbecue sauce is on top and cook them the rest of the way so the barbecue sauce can caramelize. At that half point, you might have a lot of drippings. Some of them are yummy to keep, some of them you might not. So you might want to like pour out a little bit of the drippings and then add your barbecue sauce. But then make sure when you serve it that either you take out the toothpicks, like count how many toothpicks you put in, or tell everyone like there's 2 toothpicks in every one so that you don't have any like toothpick accidents. So I'm gonna wash my hands and clean up, but thank you so much for coming to week 2 of Black History and the Restoration. It's so great to be able to share these stories with you. Next week, like I said, we're gonna hear about Brother Abel. He's one of the most famous early Black pioneers, and we'll hear his story, and then we get to hear a lot about his lineage throughout the year and a different family. There's a couple different families we get to hear a lot about their lineage, and so I'm excited to share that with you. Thanks so much for coming, and have a beautiful week. I am so excited to study Joseph Smith history, the first part, to say chapter 1, but like the first section with you. I already have some fun posts ready to post throughout the week, so keep an eye out for those. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time. Bye.